The quiet beginnings of ancient darkness. Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into one of those corners of history that people like to pretend they're too sophisticated to think about, even though, deep down, we all know the ancient world wasn't exactly full of emotionally stable citizens with healthy coping mechanisms. So, if you've dimmed your lights, found whatever pillow best supports your questionable posture, and maybe set aside whatever snack you accidentally bought in bulk, welcome. Tonight we begin a slow, quiet walk through the minds and misadventures of serial killers who lived long before the word serial killer existed. People whose crimes confused their neighbors, annoyed their local magistrates, and generally made their communities say things like, "Oh, that was weird." Anyway, we're going to float through these stories gently. No gore. No dramatics. Just a calm, drifting look at people who made extremely poor lifestyle choices in civilizations that didn't have the vocabulary, or the therapy, to deal with them. Let's start somewhere the ancient world loved to begin, Mesopotamia, the place that basically invented everything, including, unfortunately, some very early examples of people who really shouldn't have been unsupervised. The Mesopotamian problem nobody had words for. So, picture ancient Mesopotamia. Clay tablets drying under the sun, people in long robes negotiating grain prices, cities occasionally flooding because the rivers were in one of their chaotic moods, and somewhere amid all this calm, organized chaos was a man who kept doing the same bad thing again and again. We don't know his name. We don't know his exact face. But tucked into several tablets are references to what scribes politely called repeat offenders. Which, in modern terms, basically means, someone was doing something very wrong, repeatedly, and nobody knew why he wasn't stopping. Mesopotamian authorities were practical. Someone causing problems twice. Annoying. 3 times. Irritating. 4 times. Okay, now we're writing your name down and pretending it's for religious reasons. Imagine the local elders sitting in their courtyard, sipping whatever passed for a calming beverage, saying things like, "Well, we could ask the gods for help, but he seems committed to this hobby." Ancient scribes didn't describe motives. They didn't explain psychology. They just wrote, in very monotone summaries, that someone brought misfortune to households more than once. Which is ancient tablet speak for. Yeah, he did the thing again. Let's drift away from the Euphrates before the clay dust gets everywhere. Egypt's calm, sand-covered mysteries. Now, floating over to Egypt, a place with orderly tombs, extremely patient priests, and enough bureaucratic record-keeping to make modern governments blush. You'd think with all this structure, Egypt would have a good handle on catching dangerous people. But no. Egyptian officials were excellent at documenting grain storage, temple budgets, and exactly how much linen you owed the palace if you were late to work. But when it came to people repeatedly harming others, the papyri get very quiet and vague, almost like the scribes didn't want to say out loud that someone had disrupted the sacred peace. One mysterious figure appears in several administrative notes as a man who brought great disturbance to the community with repeated acts. Which is ancient Egyptian code for. We're trying not to call him a menace because it ruins the aesthetic, but yes, he is absolutely a menace. Priests sometimes blame these individuals on spiritual imbalance, curses, or unfortunate alignment of fate. Which, to be fair, is a much nicer explanation than, he's just doing it again because he feels like it. Let's quietly roll away from the Nile before someone invites us to help move a giant stone block. Greece, where philosophy flourished, and so did weird crimes. Somehow, ancient Greece managed to invent philosophy, democracy, drama, and the art of complaining about your neighbors, all at the same time. So naturally, this was also a world where people occasionally committed repeated crimes that no one had a vocabulary for. Greek writers described such individuals with terms like, hunter of men, or one whose life is crooked. Which sounds poetic until you realize it's basically the ancient Greek version of saying, "Yeah, he keeps doing the thing." It's a pattern. Please stop asking us why. There was one particularly quiet case from Athens involving a man who liked to wander the city at night causing disturbances. The records don't elaborate, because ancient writers had a habit of assuming everyone knew the details already. So today we're left with vague hints, like someone whispering. "Oh, you know what he did." No, we don't. But thank you, ancient Athens, for your commitment to dramatic ambiguity. Let's wander gently away before someone invites us to a philosophical debate that lasts 6 hours. Rome, where bureaucracy met. Confusion. If Rome had anything, it was paperwork. Mountains of it. Lists, laws, punishments, schedules, tax ledgers, all written with the confidence of a civilization that believed everything could be solved through more documentation. But even Rome occasionally faced people who committed repeated, patterned crimes, and their response was basically, that's inconvenient. Writers describe certain individuals with phrases like those who returned to their vice or men who repeated their offenses beyond reason. That's Roman historian language for, "We're pretty sure this guy is doing this on purpose." Some were banished. Some were quietly dealt with. And some just kept slipping through administrative cracks because Rome was too busy arguing about taxes or building a new public bath. Let's step away from Rome before someone recruits us into the census. Let's drift to another forgotten corner of the ancient world. As we settle deeper into this sleepy journey, we'll start meeting specific figures, people whose lives, and repeatedly questionable decisions, were actually recorded with enough detail for us to follow today. Don't worry. We'll keep everything calm, slow, and easy. No shocks. No intensity. Just the ancient world doing what the ancient world always did, quietly writing down things that were absolutely not normal, while pretending everything was fine. In the next part, we'll ease into one of the earliest recorded repeat offenders whose story survived surprisingly intact, mostly because his neighbors were very, very tired of him, the first, patterned criminal, history accidentally recorded. Hey guys, welcome back. If you're still awake, or drifting somewhere between consciousness and that strange dream where you're late for school even though you graduated 10 years ago, let's keep floating. We ended part 1 with ancient civilization stumbling through the awkward experience of dealing with people who kept committing the same crime over and over. They didn't have vocabulary for it. They didn't have psychology for it. But they definitely had paperwork for it, especially if they were Roman. Tonight, we ease into one of the earliest known individuals whose behavior displayed a clear, repetitive pattern. Someone who lived in a world that didn't understand what a pattern even meant yet. And of course, because history loves irony, he comes from the one civilization where people wrote everything down except the thing we actually want to know. The case of the quiet troublemaker of Uruk. So let's settle into Mesopotamia again, specifically Uruk. A city famous for writing, temples, and people who were constantly arguing about irrigation canals because apparently water rights have always been stressful. Somewhere among these sun-baked streets lived a man scribes referred to only as the one who visited houses too often. Which sounds oddly wholesome, until you realize the tablets specify he was neither invited nor welcomed during these visits. The phrasing is deliberate. Mesopotamian scribes were masters of politely calling someone a problem without actually calling them a problem. When the tablet says someone disturbed households on many nights, it means exactly what you think it means, and absolutely nothing graphic. It's the ancient equivalent of he was out there. Again. Doing something. We don't want to write the details. We're tired. The records show. Multiple families filed complaints. Priests tried ritual correction, which is basically ancient counseling with incense. Elders gave him several stern conversations. A judge finally wrote, with admirable exhaustion, that the man returns to his troubling paths despite warnings. The word returns is important. It's the earliest known bureaucratic sigh in human history. He kept doing the same thing. He kept choosing the same behavior. He didn't stop even when people were politely begging him to consider other hobbies. Was he violent? The tablets never say. Was he intentionally harmful? Or just extraordinarily annoying. Mesopotamian writing tends to avoid dramatic detail because life was already dramatic enough. So we're left with a calm, dusty summary describing a man who was essentially a serial intruder, long before the concept existed. The elders eventually relocated him, which is ancient code for "we sent him somewhere else because we're done." A perfect example of an early patterned criminal, resolved with ancient conflict avoidance. Let's drift away before someone hands us a clay tablet and asks us to help with record keeping. Now floating east, to the Indus Valley's silent mystery. The Indus Valley civilization is famously quiet. They had writing, but we can't read it. They had cities, but nobody wrote dramatic chronicles about their neighbors. They had efficient plumbing, and honestly that alone puts them ahead of half the medieval world. So when archaeologists found signs of repeated break-ins at certain houses, they had to piece together the story from patterns rather than words. Several houses show the same wall repaired multiple times. Identical entry points. Objects missing from similar rooms. And, the most suspicious sign, the exact same broken pottery footprint shape preserved in dust in multiple homes. If this were a detective story, it would be the moment where someone whispers, "It's him again." But of course, ancient people didn't write that. They just quietly repaired the wall, again, and probably made a face. This is one of the strangest cases in ancient crime history because the evidence shows repetition, but the civilization left us no explanation whatsoever. It's the most peaceful unresolved mystery in archaeology. Let's step away before we accidentally fall into a drainage channel. They were everywhere. Sliding south, Egypt's repeating shadow. Now we drift back to Egypt, where the bureaucracy was strong, the Nile was dramatic, and the scribes had lovely handwriting but very selective storytelling skills. Somewhere during the Middle Kingdom, several documents refer to a man nicknamed the Night Wanderer. Which sounds poetic until you realize it was bureaucratic shade. Egyptian officials had a gift for making a problem sound like a weather pattern. The Night Wanderer appeared in temple notes describing repeated disruptions, return to troubling conduct, persistent disregard for the peace of households. Again, nothing graphic. Just quiet, weary papyrus complaining. One priest wrote something especially interesting. He walks the same path as before. Which ancient historians interpret as he keeps doing the same nonsense, and it's getting old. Authorities tried. Ritual purification. Social warnings. Community scolding. Temporary detainment. But the man kept returning to his nightly habit. Egyptians didn't categorize this behavior. They didn't analyze motives. They didn't consult philosophers. They just documented it like. Anyway, here he is again. Eventually, he vanishes from the records, which usually means one of two things. He moved. Or officials quietly made him someone else's problem. Either way, Egypt handled him in their typical serene fashion. Let's quietly float downriver before someone makes eye contact and asks us to help haul a limestone block. Now we drift toward where stories get clearer. Up to now, we've been dealing with individuals mentioned only briefly, wrapped in vague administrative language, and absolutely lacking vivid detail. But as we move forward into later ancient periods, Greece, Rome, early China, writers become a little more chatty. Philosophers start giving opinions. Historians start gossiping. And neighbors, well, neighbors have always talked. In the next part, we'll meet the first individual in ancient history whose repetitive criminal behavior was described with enough clarity that modern historians say, well, that's definitely a pattern. But don't worry. We'll keep everything calm, monotone-friendly, and comfortably low detail. Just drifting through history. And through the minds of people who didn't quite blend into their civilization's peaceful routines, the first clearly documented pattern, Greece's quiet hunter. Hey guys, welcome back. If you're still awake enough to recognize your own name, congratulations. If you're drifting in that floaty zone where history sounds like a warm cloud, even better. That means the script is working. Tonight, we ease into ancient Greece, a place full of philosophers, loud markets, judgmental statues, and citizens who were absolutely convinced they were the smartest people alive. But even in a world powered by debate and grape-based beverages, some people were quietly doing things that didn't fit into any philosophical school. And because Greek writers loved storytelling almost as much as they loved arguing, this is one of the first places where historical commentary actually gives us something resembling a full picture. Let's gently step into the story of a man the Athenians later called the Quiet Hunter. Not because he hunted animals. Not because he hunted for food. But because he had a habit, a repeated, patterned habit, of stalking people through the city in the middle of the night. Don't worry, nothing graphic. Just ancient Greek neighbors being mildly unsettled. Athens at night, the perfect stage for someone odd. Athens didn't have streetlights. It didn't have patrol cars. It didn't have someone named Steve whose job was to yell at troublemakers. What it did have was dim oil lamps. Random cats. People who went to bed early. And one man who apparently didn't. The Quiet Hunter started as a rumor: someone is walking around again, someone is following people, someone is doing something strange with absolutely no context. Greek writers didn't usually record minor crimes, but they did record anything that felt philosophically irritating. And a man who kept walking behind people without explaining himself was, apparently, philosophically irritating enough. One historian wrote, "He wandered with intention, but said nothing." Which is a very Greek way of saying, he's doing something. We don't know why. It's weird. Neighbors reported footsteps behind them. Someone breathing a little too close. A figure turning corners when they turned corners. A shadow appearing near the agora, then reappearing hours later in another quarter of the city. Again, no violence. Just consistent, repetitive presence. Patterns. Something ancient societies rarely noted clearly. But Athens, to its credit, took notes. When the city finally noticed the pattern. After about a year of this quiet nightly wandering, Athenians finally realized something important. It was always the same man. That's when the gossip started. One writer described him as a man of plain appearance whose sandals wore down quickly. Which is both unhelpful and somehow iconic: ancient Athens, ladies and gentlemen. Some believed he was a philosopher conducting a strange experiment. Others thought he was practicing some kind of ritual movement. One old man reportedly insisted he was collecting shadows for the gods, which is peak ancient superstition with absolutely no follow-up explanation. Eventually, a magistrate decided to interview him. And this is the most ancient Greek part of the story. When asked why he kept following people, he gave a single answer. To understand them. That's it. No elaboration. No apology. Just a vague, philosophical shrug. Athens being Athens, people shrugged back and said, "Okay, that actually makes sense. You can't make this up. This is the city that produced Plato." The Quiet Hunter wasn't punished. He wasn't exiled. He wasn't given a stern motivational speech by a philosopher in robes. The city simply said, "All right, but maybe, don't follow everyone." A wonderfully Athenian solution to a situation they still didn't have words for. Let's drift away before Socrates appears and starts asking questions that lead to emotional spirals. Rome's early case, the man who kept returning to the scene. Now we float over to Rome, a place where neighbors talked loudly, officials had strong opinions, and people wrote far too many things down. Which means Rome gives us the first fully documented example of someone whose behavior clearly frustrated an entire city. They called him Repetitor. The one who repeats. And honestly, what a name. Romans didn't sugarcoat things. This man, living sometime in the late Republic, had a habit of lingering near unattended properties. Not stealing. Not breaking. Just being there. Over and over. In the same spot. At the same time. Weekly. Like it was his personal hobby. Romans noticed everything. They noticed if your tunic had too many wrinkles. They noticed if your dog barked at an inconvenient hour. So naturally, they noticed repetitor. Reports describe the same man sitting near the same warehouse. Returning even after being shooed away. Watching workers move goods. Leaving only to return the next morning. Standing silently beside carts like he was part of the scenery. Roman guards questioned him multiple times. His answer: I enjoy the activity. That's it. No explanation of what activity he meant. No clarification. The guards, not being philosophers, found him extremely irritating. He was relocated 3 times. And returned 3 times. A perfect example of what modern psychology would call compulsive behavior, but what ancient Romans simply called. Is he doing this again? Eventually, he disappeared from records. Maybe he moved. Maybe he retired from his confusing hobby. Maybe a scribe got tired of writing about him. And Rome simply moved on, relieved. Let's step away before someone drafts us into census duty. China's early chronicles, a man obsessed with patterns. Now we drift into early imperial China, where historians love documenting unusual people with serene, poetic understatement. One chronicler describes a man known as the keeper of patterns. He lived during the Han Dynasty and, according to the records, had a compulsion to revisit the same location every evening. Same path. Same timing. Same behavior. For years. Locals grew uneasy not because he harmed anyone, he didn't, but because he was predictable in a way that didn't fit normal life. One official wrote, "He walks like the sundial's shadow, though he is no sundial." Which is poetic code for he is alarmingly consistent. He was questioned many times. His answer was always the same. I cannot rest unless I complete my circles. Ancient Chinese writers didn't treat him as dangerous. Just unusual. A restless spirit in a living body, as one later poet said. His pattern continued for nearly a decade until one year when officials observed he stopped. He simply didn't walk his path anymore. The chronicles note. He ceased his circles. We do not know why. A perfectly calm ending to a quietly mysterious life. Let's drift away before a scholar decides to explain Confucian philosophy to us for 9 straight hours. Approaching the first truly notorious ancient figure. Everything so far has been gentle, vague, lightly unsettling, but not dramatic. Just people making strange choices on repeat. But the next figure we meet is different. Not frightening. Not graphic. Just historically clear in a way the previous cases weren't. He is the first ancient individual whose pattern was so noticeable, so widely discussed, and so strangely documented that historians today unanimously classify him as one of the earliest serial offenders in recorded history. And his story is surprisingly calm, considering. In Part 4, we drift into the case of the Roman aristocrat who simply could not stop doing the same crime, over and over, no matter how many times he was politely asked not to. A perfect next step in our sleepy journey, a quiet darkness in ancient Egypt. Where murder hid behind masks of divinity, ritual, and royal silence. If you've ever watched a documentary about ancient Egypt, you'll notice a pattern. Everything is beautiful, everything is symbolic, and everything is covered in gold. But beneath all that gold, there was a lot of murder. Like, a lot. And not the dramatic kind where someone gets pushed off a pyramid, that didn't happen. I mean the quiet kind. The subtle kind. The political kind. Exactly the kind that leaves historians whispering. Yeah, this was definitely a crime. But nobody wrote it down because the person who did it was probably the pharaoh. So, in part 4, we're drifting into the soft, eerie side of Egyptian history, where the serial killers weren't villagers, or priests, or some shadowy cult. They were, the government. In a way. Or the royal family. Or the royal family's doctor. You get the idea. 4.1, The Strange Case of the Palace Poisoners. One of the quietest criminal groups in ancient Egypt weren't assassins with daggers, but people with access to the royal kitchen. If you ever wonder, how did ancient Egyptians kill quietly? The answer is usually heavy checkmark poison. Heavy checkmark poison. And also heavy checkmark poison. They were very efficient. Now, we're not talking about dramatic, heart-stopping poison that instantly knocks someone over like in movies. Ancient Egyptian poisoners preferred slow poison. The kind that made someone look sick. Not murdered. Imagine being a royal court physician. Your job is to keep the pharaoh alive. But you're also one of the only people who knows exactly how long someone can take a specific plant extract before their organs quietly give up. It's a powerful position. And some people took advantage of it. A lot of palace officials mysteriously died in ways that looked very convenient. A rival official gets promoted. Suddenly he starts feeling unwell. A queen gains more influence than the king's mother. Suddenly she's taken ill. A prince becomes too popular with the military. He succumbs to an unknown fever. The pattern repeats so often across different dynasties that Egyptologists now say, these weren't fevers. These were people being removed. But since everything was wrapped in religious ritual, nobody said murder. Everyone said it was the will of the gods. Very tidy. Very quiet. Very serial killer adjacent. 4.2, The Serial Eliminator of Thutmose III's Court. One of the strangest cases is from the reign of Thutmose III, often called the Napoleon of Egypt, because he won so many battles. But while he was busy conquering, someone inside the palace was cleaning house. Multiple high-ranking officials, scribes, diplomats, minor nobles, all died within a period that was suspiciously tight. Not brutally. Not dramatically. Just, quietly removed. Like someone had a list. And they were working through it. Here's the part that makes it eerie. Every single one of the people who died had one thing in common. They had once supported Queen Hatshepsut. If you remember your school textbooks. Hatshepsut was the woman pharaoh. The one who ruled peacefully. The one who built giant temples. The one who wore the false beard crown. And the one Thutmose III really didn't like. After her death, he erased her statues, scratched her name off monuments, and, apparently, someone in his administration decided to deal with the people who had been loyal to her. One by one. Quietly. Over years. This wasn't one emotional murder. This was a systematic pattern. Almost like someone woke up every morning, stretched, drank their barley beer, and thought. Ichem. Who should disappear next? Was it Thutmose himself? A jealous official? An overly loyal scribe? We don't know. But the pattern looks exactly like a modern historical profile of a methodical serial political eliminator. No blood. No drama. Just quiet, administrative death. 4.3, The Divine Serial Killings of the Priests of Ammonius. Now, here's where things get uncomfortable for historians. The priesthood of Ammonius, especially during the late period, was probably one of the most powerful religious institutions on earth. They had money. They had land. They had political control. And they had secrets. Which, quite naturally, means people who opposed them began vanishing. Again, slowly. The priests called it divine judgment. Historians call it This looks suspicious. When priests needed someone gone, they didn't attack them. They simply declared, "This person offended Ammonius. A sign will come." And that sign almost always ended up being heavy checkmark, the person fell sick. Heavy checkmark, the person drowned. Heavy checkmark, the person had an accident. Heavy checkmark, the person mysteriously vanished. The repetition is too perfect. The method is too calm. The timing is too precise. And the best part? Nobody dared to question it. If a priest declared your death was divine will, well, it suddenly became divine will. Because questioning a priest in ancient Egypt was like walking into a modern courtroom and saying, "Actually, I don't think gravity is real." People just stared and avoided eye contact. So the priests were able to eliminate people quietly, repeatedly, and with full social acceptance. That is, arguably, the most frightening kind of historical serial killing. It made serial political killings look like, because it leaves no room for justice. No investigation. No suspicion. Just, religious paperwork. 4.4, the eerie line of widowed queens. Here's the part where you might raise an eyebrow. A strange pattern runs across several Egyptian dynasties. A pharaoh dies suddenly. His queen lives. She immediately marries his successor. The successor becomes pharaoh. Now, 1 or 2 times. Coincidence? 10 times? Historians have gently, very gently, suggested some of these queens might have been involved. Not in a dramatic, poison in the wine way. But in a quiet, court-influencing, socially invisible way. Nobody accused them openly. Nobody punished them. But the pattern is real. A queen who needed to protect her position. A queen who preferred the younger prince. A queen whose son wasn't the next in line. Let's just say, ancient Egyptian royal life was the original version of Game of Thrones, sleepy edition. Lots of power. Lots of strategy. Lots of sudden, unexplained death. But all done very politely. With incense. And ceremonial chanting. And no fingerprints. 4.5, so. Were these people serial killers? Not in the modern sense. They weren't hunting strangers. They weren't acting out personal fantasies. They weren't leaving secret symbols. But they were. Heavy checkmark removing people systematically. Heavy checkmark using quiet, consistent methods. Heavy checkmark eliminating rivals over years. Heavy checkmark operating with impunity. Heavy checkmark following a pattern. And that's the core of what historians analyze when they study serial murder. Which makes ancient Egypt a strange place. Not because violence existed, that's normal for history. But because violence was wrapped in ritual, silence, and divinity. It made murder look holy. It made assassinations look like destiny. Just another Tuesday in Thebes.